We will say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate. Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
Hello and welcome to The Pledge. This week, we found out that the full lineup of I'm a Celebrity includes the father of one of our panellists, a certain Stanley Johnson. He'll be moving into a strange setting with a group of egotistical celebrities, told to do weird things by TV producers, dealing with arguments and moaning despite having to do very little actual work. Sound familiar, anyone? Coming up, Rachel says your country needs you. Greg argues our MPs have a right to a private life. Michelle wants us all to take more responsibility for our health. And Karen argues it's OK that the Queen's English is constantly evolving. But first, it's me. This week, a bunch of Tory Ramonas who for months have been threatening to wreck the Brexit bill by screaming that Parliament had to have a vote on the final deal, finally got their wish. But, surprise, surprise, it wasn't enough. Now, as well as planning to sabotage the EU withdrawal bill, with 186 pages of amendments, they're also demanding Mrs May scrap plans to fix our leaving date in law, which they say renders their vote useless if a deal's not done until the last minute. But the biggest treachery? These Brexit mutineers say they'll vote with Labour to defeat the final bill if they're not satisfied with it, which of course they won't be. No Brexit bill will ever be good enough for one simple reason. They don't want Brexit. And to kill it, they're prepared to throw in their lot with Labour. So no more pretence from these Ramonas that they're doing what's best for the people they represent, because they clearly think they're ill-informed idiots. This act of sabotage proves it.
Carole, let me read you a quote. It says, if a democracy cannot change its mind, it ceases to be a democracy.
David Davis.
I was going to ask her if she knew who said it.
Yeah, I do, and of course.
David Davis. And it seems to me democracy is about what's going on at the moment in Parliament. It's about that debate. Surely it's not about saying because 52% voted this way, we're going to necessarily do everything that comes from the government. It says there's a proper discussion needs to go through here. And it seems to me you're being... I mean, for instance, if your constituents voted to remain, haven't you got an obligation to vote to remain?
But a lot of these...
But let's take the logic. The logic is, do 52% of the population who voted bind people whose constituents didn't vote that way? They voted another way. Doesn't that bind them?
My point about this, all of these Ramona MPs, they voted to invoke Article 50. I think the vote was something like 498 to 114. They voted overwhelmingly for it, in the same way they voted overwhelmingly for a referendum. Now, they voted for a process that they knew had a 2-year timescale. They knew that. So now they want to change that. You know, you didn't...
No, please, let's get a hold on this. Following on what Greg said, 52-48 is not it's a decisive decision. Well, there should have been a supermajority. For example, if you want to change the fixed Term Act 5 years, you need a 2/3 majority in Parliament. What these people are saying is, and I think it's shocking, by the way, that they're called mutineers. It's like the Daily Mail calling judges enemies of the people. These people feel very strongly that if you have this deadline and you put it in, you cannot do that because this whole situation is evolving. By the time we get to March 2019, it's already 1.5 years. The world has changed. The Brexit situation's evolved. People at that stage, let alone Parliament, might change their minds. And if you really respect the will of the people, you have to go back to them and say, these are the terms. Are you happy to leave? Are the people going to accept that you put this deadline and Parliament doesn't accept the deal and we go crashing out with a no deal? People are not going to accept that. A lot of the people who voted to leave didn't vote with a blank cheque saying just leave on any basis. They wouldn't like to leave with no deal.
Interestingly, I came across 2 people this week who both voted for Brexit and they both changed their minds. And I said, well, why have you changed their minds? And they said 2 reasons. One, nobody told us we were going to have to pay £60 billion to leave, which we're almost certainly going to have to. And secondly, the complexities of leaving are just so great that the risk is too big.
OK. Michelle, what do you think?
Well, before
let Michelle come in, Karen. She hasn't spoken yet.
Well, I'm a Brexiteer, and I share a lot of your frustrations, Carole. One of the things that I'm nervous about is I really feel like there's so much animosity at the moment and division in our country, and that makes me feel uncomfortable. So I don't like some of the headlines, to your point, I don't like some of the headlines and some of the names called. I know that at least one MP's had to call in the police because of threats, and I'm very uncomfortable with that. I want the will of the people or the majority vote to be respected. I don't see how you cannot have a date committed to legally, because if you don't commit to a date, these things will go on and on.
Carole, can I show you this headline, which has led to several threats, death threats on Twitter to Anna Soubry, who is what you would call a mutineer. And I find the language used, collaborator,
do you think
mutineer...
she hadn't had them before?
I don't know, but she received them directly after this Daily Telegraph headline. Saboteur, mutineer, enemies of the people, crush them, collaborators. Hold on, Carole, can I just finish? Thank you. It's when you run out of terms of abuse like that, obviously the leavers who are obviously finding things threatening, because I think that the mood in the country is getting a bit worried about the extent of the admin nightmare that's going to face us for the next 10 years. None of these MPs are rejecting the result of a referendum. All of them have said they respect the result of the referendum.
But they don't respect the result of the referendum.
All bar Ken, which is not the name of a chain of pubs.
He's the only one who's been...
All bar Ken actually voted to invoke Article 50, so they are actually doing what the referendum result said. And in fact, what they're doing is making sure that this enormous bill, the repeal bill that is going to cut and paste EU law, is subjected to the proper scrutiny of Parliament. You, as a Leaver, said that we should take back control. Does this not apply to Parliament as well, Carole?
Yeah. I'd like to come back on what you just said about... No, because
it doesn't apply to Parliament, because all you want is for the will of the people. Whatever that means.
I've just let you talk, but can I just say, you're using words... You're saying that we shouldn't use words like mutineers and betray. They are betraying...
They're inflammatory.
They are betraying. They're betraying their leader. They're betraying their party. They're betraying their constituents. And actually, they're betraying the country by throwing their...
Can I finish?
You're all going at me by butting in, by throwing their lot in with Labour. That is the biggest betrayal of all.
But so can I just... Sorry, this is, as a parliamentarian, I feel that's really bad. As a parliamentarian, whether you're in the House of Commons or in the House of Lords, you're meant to be objective and independent in your views. And by the way, you showed these hundreds of pages of amendments. There are over 400 amendments in the House of Commons. Wait till it gets to the House of Lords. There will be many, many more, because the experts in almost every field, including in this field, former cabinet ministers, etc., will all...
It's admin, Karen. This is what happens when you leave a block.
This is serious. There are Henry VIII powers in there that are giving power to the government and taking it away from Parliament and the people. This is really dangerous. And also the complexity. A former head of the civil service, one of my fellow crossbench peers, he was asked, how long will it take just to implement this in the civil service, Brexit? He said, optimistically, 10 years, realistically, 15 years. The complexity of this is enormous.
Article 50 has a 2-year time frame.
Which can be extended, by the way. Which can be extended.
But do you actually not believe that these Ramonas want the time extended?
I hate this term Ramonas, by the way. This Ramonas is nonsense.
I think I said Remainers.
No, you said Ramonas. It's not right.
I said it in there, yes.
No, you've said it.
I don't think that's right.
OK, so I will say, I stand by that.
You've also forgotten, I mean, there's two things. You've also, forgotten Farage. Farage, remember, on the night of the referendum, when he thought he was going to lose, said, this isn't the end of the battle.
We'll have another one.
So it was all right. It was all right for the Brexiteers to carry on the battle, but not for those... But second, let me ask you another question, both of you. I'll ask you. If you saw the Times yesterday and you saw the Guardian, I think it was yesterday, it might have been the day before, both suggested that there is growing evidence that the Russians interfered in the referendum. Now, if it's demonstrated that the Russians influenced the result of the referendum... Yes, but if the result...
How does that really...
No, but all I'm saying is if it's demonstrated that the Russians interfered in the democratic process in this country, but in the referendum, does that change your position?
By sending tweets, you really think that could influence the vote?
Well, it wasn't just tweets, it was more than that.
It was funding...
So far we think it's tweets.
My position was reached by doing my own research and asking myself the questions that I felt was important to me, and I stand by that decision. answer your question.
Sure, but the argument that is made, we've had here many times, is this is the democratic will of the people. If we can demonstrate actually it wasn't the democratic will of the people...
Greg, the point you're making is, whether it's the Russians misleading, a lot of people misled. When the time comes, people are more and more informed day by day. And as people are more informed, I'm more informed 1.5 years down the road. 1.5 years from now, it'll be nearly 3 years since the referendum took place, March 2019. Do you know at that stage, a lot of the young people who couldn't vote in last year will be eligible to vote. Sadly, a lot of the people who voted at that time may not be alive. Demographics change. So it's at that time the people who are entitled to vote must be given a chance with all the information. Are you happy to leave the European Union on the terms that are there at that time?
But they're being told they can have
and
a
that
vote.
has to be the case. That is respecting the will of the people. That is respecting democracy.
Karen, thank you for that. I vote that we have to leave this topic now because we have to move on. Your country needs you. The armed forces are in the middle of a recruitment crisis, with army numbers at their lowest since the Napoleonic Wars. Meanwhile, the threats multiply from Islamic State to Russian aggression, rogue regimes like North Korea to Trump's early morning tweets, not to mention the fact that I've got T-shirts older than the new Defence Secretary. Sir Stuart Peach calls it a gathering storm. We're 4,000 soldiers short. Well, I have a suggestion. You know what it is. It would fill the gaps in the ranks, as many would stay in uniform, and it would also help inject the right stuff, pride, patriotism and the work ethic into our young men and women who'll have to work extra hard as millions of EU nationals go home after Brexit. It will help across the sectors, not just defence. It's a no-brainer. If we're going to make Britain great again and maintain our forces, yes, bring back national service.
Totally and absolutely agree with you. And I kind of have first-hand experience of this in the sense that my husband, who was Bosnian, did national service. When he was 18, you go straight from school and you go... so he went straight into the army, did 3 months in the army, then the Navy. And what he said, he was a middle-class kid who was living a very charmed life. And he said... When he joined up, he didn't realise that not every kid had the life that he had. He said, and he came across all sorts of people. He said, but the thing is, you do uniform and everyone becomes equal. And pride, privilege, well, it doesn't matter a toss and all this. He said, and what he said is that it taught him respect, all the things you just mentioned, respect, discipline. It taught him how to give and to take orders. He said it taught him, more important, which I think a lot of people lack today, how to work as a team. He said people are not very good at that. He said it also taught that when you're working with men, the bond that you create, or women, no, but if you're on a battlefield with other guys, you learn very quickly that you're prepared to die for these people.
I'm very cheered by and warmed by what you say now. Which one
Rachel,
of you're both chuntering? Which one?
Well, I
Karen.
think, Rachel, you know, what you've said, my father... and my grandfather. My father was Commander-in-Chief of the Central Indian Army with 350,000 troops under his command. I think in an ideal world, I mean, this country has had national service in the past. Yes. My wife is South African. They had national service. My brother-in-law served in the army. It's a very good thing for all the reasons you've said. However, is this. In today's world, it is a utopian idea for a country like ours, and I'll tell you why. At the moment, our defence budget, which is the fifth largest in the world, is about £35 billion. It's 2% of GDP. We fulfil our NATO commitment. But you know something? Our army cannot even fill Wembley Stadium. The shortage is so bad. It is the naval ships we have in the House of Lords regularly, Admiral West saying our Navy is not capable. We don't have the capability anymore. So where are we going to be able to afford to invest in national service, which costs billions? And I think we should listen to what General Sir Richard Barrons, a very senior general, he had this to say.
They're never going to say publicly, or to themselves, or to their enemies, or to their allies, that we're broken. But when they fly, sail, or deploy on the land, and they look at their equipment, they look at their sustainability, they look at the shortfalls in their training, and they look at their allies, they know they are not fit for purpose.
And you know, and I think this is negligent of a government, because the number one priority of a government is the security of its citizens. And OK, just to your point, countries that do have national service to this day, and Singapore is one of them, it works. I mean, there's somebody in Singapore who came out of national service and he said, I think national service is also a wonderful tool for a country to bring her people of different races and religions together, which Singapore is made up of. And to sum it up, if I had to do it again, I happily would. So it does work.
But Karen, would it fill? I mean, would national service then serve as a pipeline to fill the gap, the depletion in the ranks? I think the same army person we saw on screen said that the army was a hologram of its former self and 20 years out of date.
But if you read what a former Army Chief of Staff quoted this week, the army is 20 years out of date, lacking air defences, unmanned drones, and cyber warfare capabilities. You're not going to get that from national service.
But if these people stayed within the ranks, then at least you would start filling the gaps. But you're not going to get that from national service. I mean, why not? Why not? Are the armies where they have national service already in existence, are they up to strength?
There are very few countries in the world that have national service. And I tell you, one is the unaffordability of it. That is a sad reality. Secondly, we can't even at the moment recruit the reserves that we need. And we're now depending on reserves, and that's an oxymoron. Reserves are meant to be reserves. We're relying on reserves now as full-time troops. So we're in a very serious situation here.
4,000.
I thought it was only a 4,000 shortfall, but you said our army wouldn't fill Wembley Stadium. Does it need to?
Absolutely. You need... every soldier will say, however much technology you have, you need basic capability of boots on the ground. A question was asked in Parliament, can we even field 2 brigades?
But to counter what threat?
A division is the smallest form of an army. The government minister couldn't even answer if we could field 2 full brigades, and that to me is really worrying.
No, but you answer the question. The answer to the question is, what is the threat?
Yeah, what threat?
I mean, you could argue that actually we wouldn't have ended up in Iraq, which was one of the great disasters of our time, if we hadn't had the army we had.
What about Afghanistan? We would have gone into Afghanistan, even despite having only, 78,000.
We'd have had far fewer troops.
But I mean, answer my question in terms of what is the modern-day threat, and does it require... Because if I think of my brothers, or my sister for that matter, or, you know, someone rocking up and saying they're off to join the army and go and fight somewhere, I would be concerned for their safety and then some. Yes. So I'm intrigued to know why you're directly linking the safety of our country with the number of boots on the ground. To counter what threat?
Because there is there's a critical mass. 2, the threats are so unknown. Who would have predicted so many of the threats that have taken place? And do you know, since the Second World War, there is only 1 year when the British Armed Forces have not actually seen active service around the world, whether it's Sierra Leone, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's Afghanistan,
whatever.
And also, as Britain, we're a global power. We've got great soft power, but soft power is useless without the hard power, and the hard power enables us to do a great deal on the global stage.
But a lot of people would argue we shouldn't be getting involved in all those conflicts on the global stage.
But that's a different I mean, it's an interesting fact that we have more hairdressers in this country, 185,000, than we do soldiers. We have 82,000 soldiers, 35,000 RAF men and 30,000 Navy men. And they're about to abolish the only 2 ships, what do they call them, amphibious? I don't know what they're called.
We haven't had aircraft carriers for a decade. I mean, can you imagine?
But don't you think national service serves another purpose too?
Yes, I do.
Hang on, it serves another purpose too, in the sense that I think we're breeding a nation of young people who don't have respect for authority, whether it be
now this comes down to it. This is your
argument. Well, let me finish. Whether they have respect for their parents, for their teachers, for their employers, and you know, now we live in this. It's like it's a fast-moving consumer society. Instant gratification. Kids don't understand about respect.
And also, Carole, not that I want us to stray into you know, private grief again, but if our younger generation, aged, let's say, 18 to 24, did do national service, we might find that our young British people were more prepared to get up in dawn to pick turnips in the sleet,
of course,
which is what we're going to need them to do when everyone else who does it goes back.
But you know how many people there are? You know the number of people we're talking about? We're talking about 650,000 people. If we were to get them all to go into the army, not all would, by the way, because they're people for many reasons who don't have to do national service. But the sheer cost of it, however much we may want to do it, will be seriously unaffordable, unfortunately.
Of the people here, I was probably the closest to national service.
Was it abolished in 1964?
It was my brother, who is 6 years older than me, was the first year who didn't have to do it. But kids from our street went to do it. I mean, it was a joke. I mean, I've got to tell you.
Why?
Well, because Well, the scams that went on to get out were unbelievable. I mean, people would take scrubbing brushes and scrub themselves just before the medical, so they went in. I mean, a terrible thing. You want a professional army. You don't want, honestly,
people
who were dragged off the streets.
They don't have to do it. It's only for a year. You only go in for a year.
Sure, but that's why
it instills. You can learn other skills while you're
but
there.
Your argument is a different one. Yours isn't about the lack of capability in the army. Your argument is it's good for people.
But it might well be.
But I'm afraid that's a world that's gone. They're not.
Discipline has gone.
People aren't going to be told by those up there that it's good for them to do.
Can I just pick up on this? Can I just say, on this point, what you're just saying, people don't appreciate enough former services people.
That's true.
Are so brilliant. The leadership skills that they lead, the teamwork skills that they learn.
Exactly.
To apply that in the civil world, there are many things like skill force. They're great, schemes.
But they weren't conscripts.
And they're brilliant.
They weren't conscripts. Look, Vietnam, the Vietnam War, I thought, saw the end of conscripts because what they discovered in Vietnam was they all turned up in Vietnam and smoked dope for 2 years, you know, because conscript armies are not effective. You want trained armies. As I said, I just read you out these quotes. The things you need are not necessarily more people. Now, every chief of staff of any of the armed forces ever has always said, we need more. They have always said that.
There's a limit to what we've shrunk to, and if you talk to any senior general, former chiefs of the army, they will all say this is very negligent where we're at the moment.
Are they saying we can't do the sort of warfare we used to do? Because that... Your point. That might
they
be
can't.
A good
They're
idea.
literally saying. You heard General Barrett, who's an expert,
can I just
put the facts in before
precisely that?
Just think, Carole, sorry, we've got to hear from what Sir Stuart Peach actually did.
The army's big enough to do all the tasks that we give it. And I would be absolutely wrong not to say we don't have an issue with recruiting. We are 4,000 below. That's a matter of public record, and we're doing all we can to improve the offer and to make sure that people understand the opportunities presented by service.
Jolly good advert, I would say, for young people to join the army, even if we can't, as Carole and I would like to introduce national conscription into a national service.
But you've just said it's all gone. It hasn't all gone. There's a YouGov poll this year that said 47% support reintroducing national service.
I bet they're not the people you're introducing.
And I know Air Chief Marshal Stuart Peach. He's a wonderful leader. He has to say what he's just said. You talk to any other former chief of the defence staff or former chiefs of any of our forces, and they will say, we've cut it too much now. We need more troops.
OK, it's me next. Now, I've been away for the last couple of weeks, and I've come back to find that the private lives of MPs are now the business of everybody. According to a couple of former senior Met police officers, porn was found on a computer in the office of Damien Green, Theresa May's second-in-command, when it was raided way back in 2008. He says the allegations are false, but he's now being investigated for this, as well as for other allegations, which he also denies. But is this fair? I don't think so. He was never charged with anything when the material was supposedly discovered, and while keeping porn on a work PC is not something I'd advise people to do, it's certainly not illegal. Like the rest of us, even politicians are innocent until proved guilty. And they are entitled to privacy. It's time we respected their human rights, just as we expect them to respect ours.
Greg, I agree with you. I mean, I think what we're seeing now is a presumption of guilty until proven innocence, which is completely the wrong way around. I think that the Damien Green saga of his porn allegedly found on his work computer is a really low point in our public life. What we're seeing now is people have a public life. They must be allowed to have a private life. If they're not allowed to have a private life, they will end up having a secret life, which then, of course, leaves them hostages to fortune to the tabloid press.
I mean, Damien Green has been condemned. You know, what happens in the investigation into Kate Mulvey?
She has to explain who Kate Mulvey is.
Kate Mulvey is the girl who has said that she was sexually pestered by Damien Green. He was a friend of her family. She says that they were out one day and he touched her knee. The quote was so brief it was almost deniable. That's how bad this was. She says she was aware he was sexually interested in her, although she has never been able to provide.
He's denied that as well.
She has never been able to provide a scrap of evidence of any of this thing. No text, no nothing. And yet he has been... MPs this week were asking for him to stand down. Why should he stand down? She has condemned him. She has actually... She's smeared him without any case against him, which I find astonishing.
And we need to
actually,
hear
at this point, we need to hear
from Damien Green in response to this. It's absolutely and completely untrue that I've ever made any sexual advances on Miss Maltby. The text I sent after she appeared in a newspaper article was sent in that spirit, as two friends agreeing to meet for a regular catch-up, and nothing more. This untrue allegation has come as a complete shock and is deeply hurtful, especially from someone that I considered a personal friend.
Are parliamentarians entitled to a completely private life, or as public figures, should they adhere to higher standards than the rest of us?
So, again, there are the Nolan principles, where anyone in public service has to adhere to those principles. And, you know, when a member of the public would say, is it all right for a member of parliament to have pornography on their computers? Now, OK, a member of staff could have used that computer and put the pornography, which the member of parliament didn't know about. Yes. But if it is the member of parliament themselves who's got pornography in their computer, I don't think the public would approve of that.
We need to hear what Damien Green actually said about these allegations, which were, this story is completely untrue and comes from a tainted and untrustworthy source. The allegations about the material and computer, now 9 years old, are false, disreputable political smears from a discredited police officer and amount to little more than an unscrupulous character assassination.
And the commissioner of the police at that time knew about it, by the way. He knew about it.
Well, it's interesting to read what he said, Sir Paul Stevenson. He said, and I agree with him, I regret it's in the public domain. There was no criminality involved, there were no victims, there was no vulnerability, and it was not a matter of extraordinary public interest. Now, that's what he said of it. Now, the person I think who should be asked a lot of questions is Bob Quick, who was the senior policeman who put it. Why? I mean, if you've been a lawyer and done that, you'd be out of the profession.
Was this what do you think,
because,
Michelle?
Well, I think that you're all kind of slightly missing the point. And you make me laugh because you've just referred about human rights in the context of watching porn and stuff. You shouldn't be watching porn in your office. It's bizarre. If you can't wait till you get home to watch your porn, you've got an issue, point one. And point two, it's gross misconduct, even by the parliamentary standards, to view obscene material on computers in your office belonging to your employer. It's wrong. You would fire someone for that, I'm sure, if you define it as gross misconduct.
It depends what your rules are, but it depends also...
Any organisation would not think that's allowed.
No, but in any organisation...
But there are hundreds of thousands of searches for porn in the Palace of Westminster. We must just say that Bob Quick has denied being the source of the leak of the accusations against Damien Green.
Just to put some context in this, by the way, a Freedom of Information request showed there was over 250,000 searches for porn stuff conducted from within the Houses of Parliament, so using that network.
Now, again, it may not necessarily be parliamentarians themselves that do that. So
it shouldn't be anyone.
I agree with that, but I'm saying one's got to be very careful here to accuse the actual parliamentarian of it when it could be a researcher, it could be any other employee as well. And that also, by the way, should not be condoned.
Porn at work
that should not be condoned at all.
It is weird, and it's not nice, and I don't want to be around guys who do, but the fact of the matter is it's not illegal, and it shouldn't be a sacking matter.
It should be a sacking matter.
I think it's more a moral issue.
Surely that's up to the organisation.
Yes, it is.
I mean, if you've ever run organisations, I mean, the one thing you have is if a complaint is made, you have a process, and you have to go through...
So you don't mind Dave, the office manager, watching porn? You wouldn't sack him?
No, I didn't say that. What I said is you have to go through a process and do it properly, and you have to be fair. And in what's happening to MPs at the moment is not fair.
But, Greg, we're sort of equating having the right to a private life to the right to watching porn at work, and they're two different things. I mean, porn at work is this sort of sleazy activity. We've been vouched for it doesn't happen. But do MPs actually have the right to live the lives without any public scrutiny?
I once bought a company in America where a hooker used to turn up every afternoon, and the person used to pull the drawers down and would have sex in the office. Now,
please tell me you sacked them for that.
No. Luckily, they weren't there by the time we bought the company.
Oh, right.
It had gone. I think we might have sacked them.
Good, I hope so.
Bring your hooker to work day.
Bring your hooker to work day. The truth is, strange things happen as long as you behave fairly to people.
But defining gross misconduct and then following that process is fair. And they define gross misconduct as, if you're looking at obscene material, it is gross misconduct.
Well, is it? That's
well,
the
no,
interesting
according to them, hang on, according to them, and I can give you an actual quote. It says, the House of Commons Staff Handbook says, gross misconduct where summary dismissal may be appropriate might include the circulation or retrieval of obscene material or the visiting of websites which contain such material.
Well, first of all,
yes.
MPs are not staff. Well, you have to understand, that it's a different relationship, but I'm not defending it. All I'm saying is, I went away and there was a whole thing. I've been away in Africa for 2 weeks. There was a whole thing going on about the film industry. I come back and the whole thing's been turned on to politics, as we always do in this country. We always turn it on to the trivia of politics as opposed to carrying on where it started, which is about Harvey Weinstein. Suddenly Harvey Weinstein's become all about a few Tory or Labour MPs, and some of them have been unfairly treated. Now, they might be guilty, but they've been unfairly treated.
Yeah, I'm not one to feel sorry for politicians on any level, but the clamour for male scalps in the corridors of Westminster and the bloodlust that's gripped them there, and they're all on accusations, most of which have been made by anonymous sources. And so these anonymous people can name and shame someone without us ever knowing if any of these allegations are true. And whether the investigations clear them or not, the reputations of those people will always be tainted on the back of this. And I think that's pretty tragic. Imagine if you're married to a guy, and like Damien Green's wife, and suddenly he's in the middle of this scandal, and he's saying, I didn't do anything. I actually think it's, that kind of, the clamour that's going on now should be reserved for rapists and real sexual predators, not somebody who might have once brushed your knee at a dinner. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. Bex Bailey, who was raped by a Labour Party senior official...
Well, says she was raped.
Says she was raped. We've heard nothing more about that. That is a real serious sexual assault. That seems to have got brushed aside for the groping allegations. And we're still talking about groping 2 weeks later, and reputations are being ruined without any evidence.
All right, this could rumble on and on. So coming up after the break, it'll be me, and I'll be saying it's time for us to start taking responsibility for our own health. I bet you didn't know that this week is National Self-Care Awareness Week. Well, now you do. The aim of this campaign is to encourage us all to take better care of ourselves mentally and physically. I couldn't support it more. Our NHS is frequently overstretched, and more of us are making poor choices which damage our health. And when we do, we're expecting the NHS to fix us. We all bleat on about our NHS and how it's a loved institution and how we want it to continue. But if that's really the case, we need to start easing its burden. And if we weren't, then the NHS should prioritise its spending on illnesses that people do not bring on themselves.
Michelle, this is a really important issue, and it's something that, for me, is very personal. My father, who was a very active soldier for many years, very fit man, even after he retired, he was always playing sport, and he smoked like a chimney. And sadly died of lung cancer. And I saw him suffer for 1.5 years. And we all said, come on, Dad, stop smoking, it's bad for your health. But he didn't. Now, there are still, sadly, people who smoke in this country when everyone knows it's bad for your health and it can kill you. Almost 20% of the population smokes. My brother, having seen his father pass away, still smokes. Now, there's human nature. And if one has to encourage people to be healthy. There are more obese people today, many more than there were when I was born. So, that is an issue. It's a big issue. And the other side of it is the National Health Service is, as you said, so stretched. It's about 9% of GDP, over 120 billion pounds a year, and we still can't make it work. And then you look at a country like the other extreme, America, their spending on health, public and private together, is 17% of GDP. Now, if we were able to spend 17% of GDP on our health, wow, that would mean so much more resource in every way. Now, it's not necessarily the only solution. We could do what we're doing much better. So there are two issues here. One is, have we got enough health spending and is it being done properly? The second is people being informed and being encouraged to be healthier all the time.
But what I don't understand is how you can either do what you're suggesting by enforcing it, by saying, OK, we're not going to, which I think 1 or 2 local health authorities have said, we are not going to treat you if you smoke. But I don't see otherwise how you get people to voluntarily stop smoking, stop drinking, and the rest of it. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? People last night were saying, we hardly had obesity in this country in the 60s and 70s. You know, it's a product of the 70s and onwards. And you say, well, why? And it's about processed food, and it's about alcohol, and it's about other things. How do you stop people? How do you get people to change voluntarily from that?
Well, I don't know if you do voluntarily, because I'm obviously very sorry about your father, but just to put some context into this, 40% of deaths in England are related to basically self-choice behaviour, smoking, drinking, eating the wrong things, inactivity. 4 million people have diabetes, 90% of which is type 2, which is behavioural and lifestyle choices. And just to put some money onto that, that means that £240 million a week... £240 million a week is spent on treating diabetes.
So what are you going to do about it?
Well, what I would do...
How do you do it?
Well, what I want is these conversations. The reason I picked this topic is because people are not talking enough about personal responsibility. And, you know, if you've got 2 patients, one of which is persisting in smoking or being inactive or eating unhealthily and being obese, and then you've got a 2-year-old child that's got leukemia or something like that, and there is only so much money in the pot, unfortunately, I'll be making very tough funding decisions and saying that the funding has to go to that child who's done nothing wrong, who's not made poor choices or anything like that, and you should be prioritising your funding.
But, Michelle, the NHS is partly to blame for this because people can't take responsibility. Let's look at obesity. You know, we have this thing around obesity. People will tell you to stop smoking or you'll die. But if you're fat, if you're overweight, you go to a doctor, they can't tell you you're overweight. If you have a child who's overweight, you have to say they're alternatively sized. People who get fat now, they're not told to lose weight or they're going to die. We spend precious NHS on counselling, on hypnotherapy, on gastric bands. We baby these people, so they're not allowed. We tell them it's a disease, an addiction, obesity. It is not. It's a totally self-inflicted condition, and yet we baby people. So how can they take responsibility? I agree with you, they should, but if you're fat, you don't have to.
But there are other things that also come into play. For example, encouraging sport. You know, on the one hand, we should be doing so much more. No, but the playing fields of schools being sold off and closed down all the time.
Well, I went
to a boarding school. I visited a boarding school in India, North India, in the foothills of the Himalayas, and it was on a really steep hillside, and the students had to walk up and down to their classes, to their boarding houses, and the headmaster said, we have no overweight children at this school because of all the exercise that they get. So if everyone's encouraged to exercise, even at an older age, even after you've retired, if you walk every day, if you exercise...
We've normalised obesity in this country, Karen. We've normalised it. You know, we just make everything bigger for them. We make bigger doors, bigger chairs, bigger ambulances.
Seats.
We've normalised it.
I mean, we've talked about this before, but I think that they should write on a Mars bar, you will need to run for, 3 hours to work this Mars bar off. And you're right about the normalisation, because they've done studies which show that people don't think they're fat anymore and they don't think they need to lose weight,
so it doesn't matter,
because it's been normalised. And if you look at newsreel from the 50s or the 60s, everyone's skinny. You could see ribs on the beach and you hardly ever see a rib, apart from on the catwalk.
OK, but the point is, how do you impose what you want? Which is basically, you're going to say to people when they come into doctors have a Hippocratic oath that they've got to treat people. Someone comes in and you say, sorry, unless you go away and lose 2 stone, I'm not treating you.
Well, no, you don't say that. What you do is you don't pussyfoot around the issue. You say you are 3 stones overweight. This is going to give you... You're going to get arthritis, diabetes.
Why not?
But they don't take any notice of that.
Well, instead, we're doing bariatric surgery.
It is like if you ever go to a medical and you say, how many units of alcohol do you consume?
So is the alternative to say it's not your fault?
Everybody lies. No, and they double it.
But is the alternative to say it's not your fault?
That's what I'm saying.
Why can't you say what you suggested?
That's pretty authoritarian stuff.
And if you don't lose weight and get healthy, I won't give you this treatment?
I'm not going to give you the treatment. It's not that you could die. They say that anyway. I'm not going to give you the treatment that keeps you going.
No, well, look, health is a human right. Okay, it's a very dangerous topic. Everyone is entitled to health, and it, for example, it saddens me in so many countries where it is access to health. Access to health is a human right. But I just want to go another point.
Let me challenge that sentence.
Yes,
health is a human right.
Access to health care
not
is a human right.
Not for self-inflicted conditions.
It's basically a human right. The ability to see a doctor if you are not well. Now the thing is, Why are you not well? Look at obesity with children. Another reason for that is the internet age that we live on. Children are spending far too much time behind iPads and screens and phones instead of exercising and leading an outdoor life. We need to encourage that more. Jamie Oliver, by the way, had this huge thing about children eating more healthy food. Now, you try and force children to eat salads and things which they don't. I'd rather they ate a good, wholesome meal and ate properly
how are you going
and
to get
exercise.
kids to do exercise when their parents don't do it?
Parents have to encourage it.
But
Parents are to blame a lot for this.
You're talking about generations of people, parents, where they might not do that. They don't do that. So then what's the alternative?
We need to encourage them to do that.
But we do that.
It's much. We need to do
There's
much
so
more.
much
We need to do
information
much
out
more.
there.
But you are
Michelle,
also
doctors
talking...
should tell patients they're overweight, and they
Yes.
should call a spade a spade.
Yes,
It's the only way.
they should still tell them they're
And they
overweight.
can.
And they do.
And they
They
should.
do.
And
The
they
question
should.
In a very
is,
gentle way.
what do you then do about it if they then say, fine, that's the way I am?
So what you could say is,
Well-
you need an operation for whatever, come back in 8 weeks' time having lost 2 stones, because if I perform it on you now, it's dangerous for you. That's what you do. You send them off and make them lose weight before they have the treatment.
Or you just be crystal clear with them and say, if you don't change your health, you will die prematurely.
It's now time for us to move on. Next, it'll be me, and I'm going to argue it's quite all right that our English language is changing. This next issue could leave some people rather concerned. Academics have unearthed an awfully worrying trend that could be quite significant. Linguistics researcher Professor Paul Baker has found the English are using words such as rather, quite, and awfully less than they once did. Some people may lament the demise of polite British understatement. But could it be a good thing? Increasing globalization brings huge benefits, and like everything from great British cuisine to the arts and creative industries, the English language is adapting and modernizing thanks to influences from overseas. The way we speak has always evolved. It's perfectly natural. New words are invented, old words disappear, and accents change. For businesses, sciences, and literary arts, the changing nature of the English language is a good thing. In it?
You should have put a back to front baseball cap on when you did the innate. That'd have made it proper at
Like
the
William
end.
Hague.
I can honestly say, apart from a very brief period a few years ago when I went out with, don't ask me how, but I went out with one of Prince William's best friends and I infiltrated the upper classes for a short period of time. Other than that period of time, I've never encountered anyone in my life that would say words like frightfully good or awfully. I don't really know people that talk in that manner. But I'm also someone who doesn't regard myself as having an accent and saying words that some people wouldn't understand either. But I don't really know anyone that would feel concerned about this. Things evolve, words change, interesting words of the year get added to the dictionary each year, and I'm absolutely fine with it.
Well, I'd like to hear what everyone else thinks. I mean, you know, for me, I've got 4 children and teenagers, and the language that they use now, I mean, when they say something is sick, it doesn't mean it's awful, it means it's cool.
It's also very old hat to say sick. Everyone's now saying woke and things like that. I have no idea what
So
woke
vernacular does change and evolve over time.
It's a slow Americanisation, isn't it?
Not always.
But look at I was just kind of, this was your subject, I was thinking about the words that we use from America now. We use words like cop and movie and stuff like that. But we don't take up some of their other words like trash. They say trash for rubbish, like mom. We still say mom or ma'am.
Or line for Q.
Vacation. We don't say that. We don't say gas. We don't say petrol. And I just think we're very choosy about the words we choose from the Americans, aren't we? I think we're particular. But you were mentioning that rather awfully frightfully. I think that gives our language a national character. When I watch a Miss Marple, you know that's how they talk on Miss Marple. You know that's English, and I think that gives a colour around the world.
So there's a charm.
I don't want to lose it entirely.
You're right. There is a charm to it, but on the other hand, I mean, this is Global Entrepreneurship Week, and as somebody who's built a business and you want to encourage British business around the world, sometimes in the past, I don't think we've been bold enough from shouting from the rooftops about how brilliant we are as a nation and how good we are to trade with and you know, so then you say, oh, we're quite good. No, we're very good.
Well, we could say we're frightfully good, couldn't we?
You could say we're frightfully good. We could say we're awfully good, but there's quite the understatement. There's a time for it, but there's also a time to be positive and bold, and for that reason, I'm actually for the change.
I think we should be forever grateful that the Americans chose to speak English, and it was touch and go at one time. It was nearly German, and we should be forever grateful because wherever you go, no, German. Wherever you go around the world, people now speak English because the Americans speak English, and if it's not our English particularly, so be it. What I always find interesting is, you know, I've got a good London accent, and when I go to America, they think I'm posh.
Yeah. And more intelligent than we are. They automatically add 10 points onto you if you speak...
Well, I think probably some of us need that.
But we've got... on our Mac computer, other computers are available, it says, do I want American English or English English, doesn't it? Or British English.
Yeah.
Because there is a difference. Am I right in thinking, Karen, I love your topic. I mean, to me, our English language is our greatest export and one of our great pleasures of life and living in this country and in many other countries. But I've heard that in India, they do speak proper Queen's English in a way that you don't actually hear it now. Is that true?
Well, English is the language of business in India and around the world. I mean, English is by far the #1 language in the world. Spanish comes a very, very far second.
But in India, they speak Queen's proper English, and it's very frightfully, isn't it?
Well, English is by far the #1 language in the world, and it is a language of business in countries like India. Spanish is way second as the second most spoken language in the world. But I think we should go back to how things have evolved. And we're on Sky News. Let's look at the first Sky News broadcast in 1989 and see the difference.
Good evening. You're watching the World News from Sky Television News on the hour, every hour.
And our first story this evening, 10 Britons have agreed to sell their kidneys for cash to a German count who plans to set up an organ transplant business here.
Comparing today with Sky is not the right comparison. Go back and compare it with the BBC 10 or 20 years earlier, and it sounds incredibly
very
films,
even in the 60s, which you know was seen as a radical period of change. And actually, the BBC accent.
It's not just the language; it's also accents, isn't it, Karen? Yes. I mean, I've got a thing here. It's a graph here. It says in the 50s, and we're going to see it on screen. The percentage of the country that had accents, there we go, it's the left-hand side, that's the 50s. That was kind of heavy accents. Look to the right now. All accents are being faded. But they want me to say a word that demonstrates accent, that demonstrates my accent, the northern accent, and probably yours.
What
butter.
Word? Butter?
Butter, and you say...
Butter.
Butter.
Butter. So, yeah.
But I don't think I've got a northern accent.
You do.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I don't. You have to accept
you do.
Yes, you have.
Just like I have to accept that I've got a bit of an estuary.
Yeah, like if I go back to Hull, like when I'm in Hull, my mates will laugh at me. They think I sound real
you've gone
posh.
posh.
And you've got to say Hull, not Hull.
Say the word no.
You say old.
Say the word no.
No.
Exactly.
If you want to speak Hull, by the way, watch this. This is this guy, this Korean guy who randomly was practising his Hull.
Hello everyone, this is Billy. Today I'm going to talk about how dialect works. The first one is nithered. Nithered means being cold. Then let's take a look at an example sentence. It's snowing, I'm cold. It's snowing, I'm nithered. Next word is mufted. In Hull, mufted means being hot. Oh no, I'm so hot. Oh no, I'm proper mufted.
See, I don't think I sound like that, and I don't even think he sounds like the whole
I don't think he sounds like anybody.
Michelle, I've got a question for you. Say air.
Air? What, as in the air I breathe? Or
say
hair?
Hair. Say lair.
Lair.
Say all three. Air, hair, lair.
Air, hair, lair.
I'm
surprised. I'm surprised you've not got me to say snow globe, because that's what people try to get me to say.
No, but what interests me is that the English, so many of certainly the London public schools now, I mean, the kids are trying to learn estuary English, basically. They don't want to speak like some of your family might have spoken at some stage.
And yours, Greg.
No, I don't think mine ever spoke.
And you know, the other ironic thing about all this is, to this day, I'm Chancellor of the University of Birmingham, and we have the Shakespeare Institute at Stratford-upon-Avon as part of the university. Shakespeare, 400 years later, the influence that Shakespeare has in the whole world, basically, quoted more than probably anyone else. And look at that Shakespeare in English, how different it is to the English today, but we still quote from it, we still refer to it.
Oh, Rachel does. I like it when you randomly drop in random Latin words sometimes. And I sit here and I'm thinking, I've got no idea what she just said, but I smile and nod as though I know what you're talking about. I'm like, yeah, I agree.
Well, we need to have some educated people here, don't we?
Yes, it's true.
I did almost pick you up on saying the Hippocratic Oath was the hypocritical oath, which I thought was even better.
I knew I was in trouble with that when I started.
Dear me. Anyway, moving on. You know the scene, I'm sure. There's straw on the floor. See what I did? There's Mary and Joseph in the stable. There's the three wise men gathered around. And then there's a sausage roll in the manger, obviously. That's right. The bakery chain Greggs thought the traditional nativity scene could do with a modern twist, releasing this image to promote their advent calendar. Needless to say, it provoked a mixed reaction. Initially, a spokesman for the company said that novelty advent calendars have been around for years, so we thought it was time to take the concept up a notch. But then they very quickly added that they were sorry if they've caused any offence. Greggs, there's nothing half-baked about that statement. And for you, you had to get our apology of the week. What do you think? I loved it.
I loved it.
I loved it, but, you know, I was doing Sky last night and I said that I loved it, and you can't imagine the abuse I got on Twitter. People saying I was being totally disrespectful to Christians. But, you know, the thing is, and what the priest who was actually complaining about this said, and this is true, I thought it was very funny. What he said was, he said, no, you would not do this to any other religion apart from Christianity.
But you should be able to.
You should be able to, but no one would.
There's no question that it can be construed to be disrespectful. But I love sausage rolls.
And I love the fact they're taking a bite out of it as well. There's a great big bite missing from it.
I love the Telegraph. Their headline was the headline of the year. It was just like, Greg says sorry for replacing Jesus with a sausage roll. I laughed so hard. And by the way, interesting fact, did you know if you say Jesus
backwards, you know what it is?
What is it?
Don't tell them. Yes, it is. Did you just work that out now? I had to write that down last night.
Right,
anyway.
well, that's it for this week. Don't forget, you can find The Pledge on Facebook and Twitter to carry on the debate. See you next week.